All right. Hope everybody is having a great day. Today, we have a special guest with us as we're going to be talking about aligning forces to cyber secure our world. I'm Matt Luallen. I'm the Chief Executive Inventor here at IntelliGenesis. And of course, we have Scribs with us, Chief Technologist. And again, our guest today, super excited about, we have Emily Miller, Vice President of National Security and Critical Infrastructure for Mocana. Yeah, a mouthful.
Welcome, Emily.
Yeah, former Fed. I can't get away from the acronyms and the long names. So you got to make sure it just goes on for at least a good 46 syllables.
That's awesome. That's funny. So, there has been so many things going on over the past several months around securing critical infrastructure, well, decade, right? But it just seems to be ramping up, right? Securing critical infrastructure and cyber physical systems. And then, I own CyBodyWorks and we got acquired and then we started reaching out. I see that you're over at Mocana. I'm like, holy cow, what's going on here? So pretty exciting times. Yeah,
it really is. And I think that's important for everybody who's, coming on, as Matt and I have been, circling each other for a very long time. And Matt, actually, I'm so glad to get reacquainted. He was one of the first people I got introduced to when I was learning about operational technology. I mean, probably 10 plus years ago. And figuring out, what's the lay of the land? How does this relate to critical infrastructure? Again, I came from a non-traditional background, then through physical critical infrastructure. So now landing here where it's, things that we are so passionate about, critical infrastructure, are starting to come up just in regular news is really exciting. And figuring out today how we can, work together. What's the policy environment? What are the things that we should be talking about? Because you and I have been doing this for a long time, you longer than me, to really say, we're at an inflection point, I feel, and how do we continue to advance and move this forward?
Yeah, and you bring up, the policies, the regulations, the way to steer, align, guide, and what I think is we're probably going to have a lot more people right now becoming aware of how critical this is. That's what we're seeing, and now they want to play a role. They think they want to try to understand it, and I know yesterday we were talking and you used the phrase cyber adjacent. Yeah. Right. So I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. So they feel cyber adjacent, but they want to go and contribute. And we're trying to figure out, what are the things that they should go and target?
Right. And I think that's the biggest, I did, cyber adjacent. And that's really how I felt coming in is, I was working in physical infrastructure protection. And there was the next level of, okay, how do I learn to take that knowledge and continue to try to apply it? And so I moved into operational technology, control systems, that sort of thing. But I've had a lot of people reach out recently. I've done a couple of things on podcasts and a number of educational type of, formats. And a lot of folks have reached out and they're from not really traditional background. Even outside of IT, which is really exciting because that means that folks are finding the passion that I want everybody to have about this. This is so important. And thinking about how there's a lot of us who want to know how we can do good and make a difference in this world and do something that matters with our lives. And I really think that this is a huge opportunity to do that. And I posted on LinkedIn today, we were going to talk about saving the world. And that's somewhat in jest, but it's also true. And it's something that I think anybody who has an interest who might be like, well, what's this cyber thing and how do I engage? And I'm not necessarily a hacker and I sort of know how to code or I don't know how to code at all. Me. How do you engage in this? And that's really what we want to talk about today is how do we all come together and use the skills, talk about cyber policy a little bit, because I think that's someplace I have a particular expertise in that. And that's someplace that I think is an easy entry point for those of us who are more cyber adjacent rather than directly involved in the technical side. So I'm excited.
Yeah. And then, you look at, well, what was it? Just last week, we started the 100-day sprint, right, within the Department of Energy and looking at, power grid resources and trying to have a more defensible position. Do you have any vision into some of the things that are going on there?
So much. So let's start at kind of the beginning. The administration put out that throughout the summer, it's going to be doing 100-day sprints for cybersecurity. So this recent one is a 100-day sprint focusing on, I believe, just the electric sector. And I think they're probably going to move on to other sectors potentially. They're definitely going to do some operational technology sprints. But what I find interesting, And I think I understand a little bit why. So this is a huge problem. Huge problem. Cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. How do you start to tackle it? And if you're going to do something measurable and impactful that doesn't take 20 years, you want to be able to do something that's a little, I'll say easier. It's not easy, but easier to implement. So this is focusing, it looks like, on network detection, network level tactics and procedures and techniques to do, things that you can figure out. How do we help make critical infrastructure more secure via operational technology networks? But what I'm curious about, and we've talked about this before when we were prepping for this session, is that it? I hope that's not it. I mean, it's just a 100-day sprint, so I have to assume it's not. It's just a place to start. But for everyone who's getting engaged, critical infrastructure and operational technology is so much more than networks. And to Matt's point, that we've been doing this for a long time, and Matt 10 years ago was talking about, how do you create defensible networks? How do you monitor networks? How do you gather that information, use that to your advantage so you can create a secure posture? It was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So now we're into okay, now we need to do hard things. What does hard things look like? Again, I'm a little suspect because I'm from the government previously. I want the government to take on these really hard issues. And so a 100-day sprint, not for nothing, is a big deal. And having the government say, we are making these initiatives, and we're starting them, and we want to focus on them in critical infrastructure, and the industry is engaged, and that's awesome. But also for me, it's a little bit like womp womp, network security, operational technology networks. What else? What else can we do? So this is really where we can take as a community kind of the bull by the horns and say, that's awesome. Keep doing what you're doing, but you're the government. This is your time to do hard things. We can do hard things together. And that's really what I want to see upcoming. So I have a lot of thoughts on what that looks like. I'm all about the 100-day sprints. Again, you have to set something in motion. You have to begin somewhere. That's a great place to start. But I hope that's not all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a mouthful there to take in, right? Of thoughts.
Mouthful, yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, we think about what we've achieved so far, right? Which has been by a pretty, I would say, small, finite community, right? And for us to take what has even been achieved within the electric sector over the past 15 years, even longer, but 15 years where we really started tackling with NERC SIP and regulations and trying to defend it using that path. But, I almost sort of look at this 100-day sprint right now around it as almost like a spotlight of, hey, how can we tweak and operate and take what we've done and then apply it to additional areas of critical infrastructure, because everything builds on top of each other, right? We have the energy sector, go and defend water without energy. Well, good luck with that. Go and defend energy without water if you have hydro generating facilities. I mean, there's this whole spin.
Right, interdependent and connected, yeah. Yeah,
it's so interconnected. And one of the things I've always felt, and for anybody that's ever gone to some of the hacker conferences like DEF CON, for instance, I mean, there's several out there, but I've always felt if we're truly going to get to the point where we secure these things, we can't be having villages at DEF CON, we have to be having castles, right? I've always thought it has to be like we're now finally going to the ICS castle instead of, the ICS village, because
what about the ICS Burning Man? That'd be great.
That would be a whole different experience, I think.
Hey, it would be, but we get some really great ideas out of that for sure.
That is true. I don't know how many we remember afterwards, but we have to see. But to your point, I'm excited about the focus. Right. I mean, that has been necessary. I'm excited about, okay, if you want to lead with network, that's fine. That's okay. We've been there. We were talking about that before. I mean, that's when I first got into this space 15 years ago and then really started highlighting it 10 years ago. I was like, you know what? The only way to defend this is to moat it, right? Secure it, castle it, at least somewhat. But then what about the insides? What about the edge? And if we're thinking about OT, this is so geographically dispersed. Can you really contain it? I mean, you really, so I want a castle and I want to monitor, but the thing is, can we actually, how do we start securing those edge components that are there and not just think about the network? Because now, I mean, the edge is growing with IoT. The edge is growing with Industry 4, 5, 6, 0, whichever one it is right now. And that has to be something we focus on.
Right. And I think also, when you did start to mention this, talking about control systems and operational technology and having the moat and talking about, OT networks, we also have to remember that we're not just talking about traditional operational technology and traditional control systems. And certainly that's where the focus is right now at a policy level, talking about water, power, power generation, all of those pieces that are fundamental to anything else existing. But when you're talking about the community coming together, you have to remember that operational technology is beyond just, traditional setups, or you have the DMZ and you have your singular operational technology network. And yes, there are edge devices, but you're talking about edge devices for a plant or edge devices for a facility, or your water utility that may have a couple distributed facilities, but it's all still part of the same utility network, whatever you want to define that as. But remember, we're talking about operational technology going to food and agriculture, where your edge devices are your combines.
Right.
You're talking about healthcare, where edge devices are, and a lot of folks will go to the implantables, right? But edge devices are pretty much anything that may be able to connect, not that has a persistent connection, but that may be able to connect on a hospital environment. So how we deal with this issue. Certainly, again, you have to start with some of the more low-hanging fruit. Again, we're using some swag here where we're just saying it's easy, it's low-hanging fruit. None of this is easy and none of this is quote-unquote low-hanging fruit, but let's tackle it. But we have to think about how do we incorporate all of these environments together to create policy strategies that everyone can use and consume. So maybe there's a 100-day sprint happening, push with the Biden administration and push with the the Southern companies and all the other folks who are engaged and involved in the Department of Energy. But now how do you take some of those lessons and start to push that into the broader operational technology communities and the broader folks in the industry like ourselves who can help move things along? And I think that is something that in this talk today, I want to make sure that people know when we're talking about critical infrastructure, it doesn't just mean the big things that you think of turbines and water treatment plants and electric. And yes, it's that, but it's also a whole host of other things that keep our way of life moving, running, and functioning.
Yeah, the way I've tried to connect those dots for a lot of people is you can think critical infrastructure in bulk, right? For the government, for the state, for the county, but then you can also now just think about yourself personally, right? What's critical to you? What's critical to you is that insulin pump that's on you every day that's keeping you alive, right? What's critical to you is that pacemaker that's inside you, that is keeping you alive. What's critical to you is your car. What's critical, but then those are critical in mass. Those are also critical infrastructure as you start joining that together and realize how that supports not just you, but a lot of people that have those same types of tools or challenges with their life or whatever it is that they're trying to go through. And those are critical infrastructure that we have to be defending. Right. And the next part of that is, how do you persuade or guide or channel, number one, a vendor to then be able to put some of these controls in the product at the same time when they're trying to compete in a marketplace with other entities that may decide to not put in security controls, to take that risk, take that chance, not worry if their company collapses. Think about the ethics behind it, and that's what you have to guide. And that's where government has a great play to help provide that marketplace and guide it.
Right. I think that's one thing that needs to come.
Go ahead, sorry.
I think that's one of the things that needs to come out of some of these sprints is like, we'll do this discovery effort, but what's going to compel people, organizations, other components of the government, state governments, local governments, to actually implement any of the controls that are necessary to actually do the protection of those systems, instead of exposing the problem and then everybody turning away from it again and just waiting until something happens.
Right. And I think what's interesting, we're hitting on a couple of really interesting things. So we have protections moving to edge devices, and that can be a whole host of things. We're going to encompass it and call it edge devices, but that's a lot of stuff. And we also have, so you made a point about who's making the vendors add in that level of security that we know we need on edge devices. Now we also have, how do we compel state, local, municipalities to make the changes that are needed, which is what I think these sprints are starting to touch on. But there's a couple of things happening, and you can see, and again, the government is doing something that's very necessary. It's a great conversation to start, but the things that need to happen are really hard. On edge devices, it's manufacturers who know what they need to do, but nobody wants to be the first one to jump into the deep end of the pool and say, there's nobody mandating this. I have one customer who may want it, but it's not a confluence of customers. So perhaps I don't want to make these changes when there may not be a huge market for it yet. Municipalities are saying, well, I don't want to pay anything more. I can't pay anything more. I don't have any more resources. So I'm going to do the stuff that really doesn't cost me any money to do, or is, $60,000, add a new, widget that goes blinky blink, whatever, to your architecture. And Bob's your uncle, you've addressed cybersecurity. Well, this is where the government come in and say, look, there's hard things to do here. And I don't know quite what that looks like. I've talked previously about it before. Where is it carrot? Is it stick? Is it both? Is it regulation? Is it money? I'd love to know what you guys think about that and kind of some of these big topics that we're swirling around.
Yeah. I still reflect upon what we did in the electric sector with NERC-CIP, right, and continue to do. And there was a couple of things that I learned that were very valuable. Number one, there was finally a cost of doing nothing for the owner operators, right? And so there were penalties associated with noncompliance, with auditors coming in to analyze those events, and they were going to fine you, potentially fine you in a way where it even comes back to you, right? So you can get a fine, and then you can use it to go and remediate some of your problems, but that was there. And the other part that was pretty interesting that I've felt over time, and then now actually realized, when you purchase this equipment, a CFO and the financial side of this game has a gigantic play in it, right? So maybe there's a 10-year operational lease. Maybe there's some kind of, there's a capital expenditure that comes along with this. And so you're looking at that cost on your books, and you can't, you already have it there. And so do cities, right? Cities, they go and they issue a bond for any work that they're doing within freshwater, wastewater, any of their operations. And so now, how do you compel a change for whatever was there that also has a contract over the same duration, that already has all the controls listed in it, that already has the people and what their roles and responsibilities are? How do you open up that opportunity for them to make changes? And one of the things NERC-CIP did was it allowed some of the companies to capitalize their the time for personnel and the assets that they were acquiring for NERC-CIP compliance. They were able to put that on their books as a capital expenditure.
Yeah, I think that sort of structure, and I don't obviously have all the answers to that, but one of the things of like, well, okay, there has to be some sort of incentive, because everybody hates the stick. Everybody hates the gigantic R word, and even NERC-CIP got the, oh God, you're going to make us do that. But now here we are. And if we can figure out where's the carrot along with that, I mean, and is it exactly what you said? Is it something that you can start putting into your books? Is it grant incentives? Is it, there's something, not tax write-offs, but there's some other interesting things that the government is able to do in terms of financial incentives and incentivizing action that we have to be able to apply.
Yeah. Yeah.
For not just the asset owners. I think there has to be some sort of incentivization as well from the device manufacturers. I really do, because, and this is something I didn't appreciate when I joined Mocana either, that has been, because I was a Fed, we don't try to make money, right? We spend it. So coming into the private sector, I was like, wait, it can't cost a cent more? Really? Wow. But that's really true. So how do you, as a device manufacturer who wants to do the right thing, who knows that you need to at some point get to security level 4 for IEC 62443, but right now everybody throws a party when you get to security level 1, which for anybody who doesn't know is you can defend against a script kiddie. That's security level 1 that everybody's really excited to meet because it's damn expensive to put all of that in, and the entire apparatus and the infrastructure, and your customer has to buy it, and ain't nobody got money for it except for maybe some big guys who are focusing on network level stuff right now. So to your point, how do we create the incentives? And NERC-CIP is a great example of one way to go about creating the incentives at the owner operator level.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important too, to kind of, I was talking to somebody last week about two kind of things, like how do we compel, or how do we explain to like C-suites why this is important? And we started discussing the risk to their businesses, right? Like the airports, you're going to lose passengers, you're going to lose tenants, you're going to lose all these other things. And I think that's one way to kind of incentivize business people. You're going to lose money on your bottom end. But the other thing too would be, how deep do we go with it? This government push, this sprint is going to hit the top level, power distribution system, but how do we actually get it down to consumer ends? How do we get it into facilities, people who are building things out and providing real estate for commercial real estate? If you've ever driven along the New Jersey Turnpike up to New York and you see all the industry that's all adjacent to each other, how do you compel them to work and identify the risk to them and to all the other pieces that are coming into it and stuff?
And not just identify it, but not accept it and not defer it. I mean, that's really what's happening. And that, to Matt's earlier point, there was a cost to doing nothing. There's really not, aside from a couple industries that are highly regulated, nuke, electric, there is not really, unless I'm misspeaking, a cost to doing nothing that I've seen coming out of almost every other industry. And I know, for example, the FDA was trying to put together its pre-market cybersecurity guidance that was supposed to be released in 2019-ish, and then, of course, COVID, so reshuffling of priorities. But even that, which was preliminary steps to, enhance the actual on-device security requirements, I'm not sure what happened to it. I don't know if it died a death or if it just got put off because of COVID, but I know that there was a lot of resistance from the manufacturers to have requirements of that nature, not because some of them were doing it themselves, but to have it written down, codified, et cetera, that they would have to go through the appropriate channels to make sure that they meet this new requirements for cybersecurity of medical devices. And looking at how do we move that needle across the board without implementing the giant big R, but creating some sort of schema where you're incentivizing private sector, you're incentivizing so small business. I know that Dragos, and I've mentioned this before, has the Neighborhood Keeper program that they've been working with Department of Energy on. And I think that's kind of tying into this sprint. But things like that incentivizes a small business to have an opportunity to build something out that they may not be able to afford to do without cost for critical infrastructure. So something like that. I think there's a lot of pieces at play here.
Yeah, it's hard. It is definitely a hard problem.
I have lots of thoughts too, so I'm just kind of trailing and rumbling them on together.
Yeah.
I think this other thing is like the scale at which this is occurring, right?
Yeah.
That IT security is difficult because of the scale and the number of devices we have, the number of interconnects between businesses and personal life and everything else. But then you start adding in all those other things that make daily life happen. And like you were saying, like critical infrastructure, water, power, health care and everything else. But how about transportation now? As we talk about autonomous vehicles and having roadways and transportation systems that are communicating and everything else, that becomes critical to you. The healthcare expanding out becomes critical. Agriculture becomes critical. I mean, all these different aspects. Our homes now become critical because if you access somebody's home improperly, now you might gain access to compute power on the edge, and you can disrupt any number of things upstream from it. So,
well, and not just that, you mentioned the commercial industries. Our homes are now becoming our workplace. I mean, not just for fun, like actually where we're working now. Yeah. So, anyways, continue on, Scrib. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think that's like the scale of. I think it kind of scares people away from it too. Like, well, how big are you talking? We're talking about billions of devices.
And it's not going to get smaller.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, so you mentioned, Matt, thinking about the Internet of Things, and everybody's like, oh, the Internet of Things, it's your TV and your fridge. And you guys, we have to be able to apply those principles of how you deal with headless things that are talking to AI, ML engines that will not interact with a human, that are gathering data that a human somewhere is making a decision upon, or they've set in motion something that's going to make a decision on it independently. This landscape that you just talked about, Scribs, is only going to get bigger. We're not going to contract from today. So if we don't start addressing in a very real way these problems today that are already feeling monstrous and overwhelming, how much worse is it going to get when, especially 5G, it's already started to roll out, when it really takes over, and then the successor to 5G? This is not a problem that we're going to be able to easily wrap our arms around later on. It's just going to get worse and more difficult if you don't start establishing some of that framework and baseline now, which goes back to it's time for the government to do hard things.
Yeah. So number one, you can't just stop it, right? So it's growing as it is, right? You know, we can say, hey, we're going to push put the answer to this off, but as you're saying, it's just going to get harder to try to address it, and it has to be technical and procedural. You know, it has to be persuasive, and it's going to have to be where some people are going to have to make really, I think, hard decisions from a government perspective. They may have to put their candidacy on the line on some of these things to say this is what we're going to do, right? You have got to make the decisions on what has to be done, whether it's all right, you know what, you have to be in a separate network infrastructure, or you have to buy products from X, Y, and Z, or they have to have certain controls on it, but the no plan, right? You know, that's what we can't be in that anymore. And I've been pretty happy as I'm starting to see that we seem to be on a plan. You know, there's more of a direction now than there ever has been in this whole area. At least what I'm seeing. And so I'm like, hey, you know what? This is a chance. I want to jump in this. I want to help guide it. I want to at least be a voice in helping guide people, you know, make these types of decisions as you are, you know, and I can only hope that we're able to help. Hey, you know what? I'll help you make that hard decision, right? You know, we can go down that path. We can get the consensus and then, you know, say, hey, here's what we have to do to go and secure this type of environment, because it matters, right? If we don't go and defend this, our way of life changes.
Right. And I think something, Matt, that you've been so good at is inspiring and teaching and really pushing the envelope in terms of how we think about cybersecurity for operational technology and physical cyber systems. And I made a joke about Cyber Burning Man, but obviously I'm joking about making an actual Cyber Burning Man. But what I do think, I'm not joking about the revolutionization of ideas. This is not a time for constrained thinking. And we need people from across the spectrum, from across industries, from across variety of experiences to come together and think real big about how do we solve these issues. And I don't just mean, you know, come in with your, we can do compensating controls here. I mean, of course, how you practically implement it is going to be what it is. I mean, you can only do the steps that you can do. But here's just an example. So I come from a peace and conflict background, and years ago, we always, in my program, which was at American University, it was like, we're striving towards world peace. I was like, that is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard of, because you're never going to achieve world peace. Human beings are that's the way we are. We are warful, awful, argumentative creatures. We have peaceful tendencies, but mostly we're horrible jerks. However, the whole point about having this gigantic, huge goal of world peace is that if you set your sights big, you're going to make much bigger strides to get to that big idea than you would if you scale yourself back. Mm-hmm. And I think right now and it doesn't have to be just is going to happen just this year. Like, we have an administration term to do this. But while we've got while we've got the wherewithal, we're talking about an infrastructure bill, we're talking about cyber sprints. Now is the time for big and bold ideas where we say, what is the art of the possible? What is the blue sky? And throw everything on the table and then figure out from there, what can we do? And I don't just mean, okay, you've got some stupid big idea that we're never going to achieve. I'm not even going to focus on that. What if it's not a stupid idea? What if it's something that could be possible, that would take a lot of things to do, but it is in fact the outcome that you want to achieve?
And I think just on that note, I'm hoping everybody that's listening to what you just said is resonating with, you know, they can be that big idea. Even if they've never spoken up before, you can do it. I mean, and that's the whole thing. Back to your point of what I've tried to do for everybody is I try to inspire people to then feel that they are okay in saying their ideas, in defending things and inventing things, because that's exactly what we should be able to do now. If we do this correctly, if we secure these systems correctly, which is going to be a combination of maybe we're saying we got to get rid of something, right? Maybe part of the answer is some of these things we shouldn't have automated, which I know we've talked about before. And maybe another part is we do it differently. Maybe another part is, you know, again, we invent something that ends up being even better. But I will tell you, anybody that jumps into this, so if you're brand new, if you're cyber adjacent, number one, get excited because you can be in this opportunity. Number two, you know what? Anything that you learn with what's going on in this space, not only are we going to be defending, we're going to be innovating. we if I want to go back, to what happened 100 years ago in Industrial Revolution, 150 years ago, Industrial Revolution 1.0, right? When 1.0 was, it's really amazing to read up on the history and learn about Edison and Tesla and AC and DC and Westinghouse and all, how the grid even started and how we started automating, how our modern society works. We didn't have buildings, we didn't have skyscrapers until we started having electricity, so we could then have elevators, right? There's just quite an interesting evolution that we've had. And what I've been feeling over the past year and a half, I actually changed that word evolution to, we're going to have, I'm going to say revolution, not like revolution where we're going to have unrest, revolution where we're going to have an amazing future of opportunities, but we have to make sure that we do it correctly, because what I don't want is the machine to be controlling us. I'd rather us controlling the machine.
Yeah, right. No, sign it. Yeah, I really resonate with that. And I think particularly, I know that I have, and we were just talking about this before we started the chat today. I was talking about how the operational technology community, which I've been a part of for years, I still am really tentative because I don't want to be shat upon for saying things that are maybe outside the norm, or I'm technical, but I'm not super duper technical that I can really tell you all the ins and outs of every single, programmable logic controller, et cetera. So when I suggest something that's based on broad knowledge and some good knowledge, but may not be like the most I-Ching technical thing, I'm really worried that I'm going to get crapped on. And that's somebody who's been in the industry and knows a lot of people. So imagine what it's like for somebody else who may have a fantastic idea. May not be fully formed yet, but you need to start bouncing that off. And if you're scared to come in and talk, where are we going to get the improvements from? Where are we going to get the innovation from? Where are we going to get these new ideas that are really going to push our own preconceptions of what is true and valid and what can work? And I think that is an extraordinarily good point for anybody listening today. Just start talking to us. I am receptive for sure to people talking, because I've got my own imposter complex. I've got all sorts of, foibles and vulnerabilities. So I want to hear you and your ideas, because that's only going to push us further, particularly if you have a non-traditional background, or even if you're from a traditional background, but you're like, that's kooky. I think we can do it better. And here's how I think it can work.
Yeah, so I was interested in seeing who the sprint composition was, right? Of who was in that space actually doing the guiding along with the government, right? There's a lot of really smart people in the government, but I don't see them being tied into this as technically as they should be, right? If we look at some of the organizations and stuff, they're super smart people, but maybe not as experienced as some of the people that are actually in the field every day doing it, right?
Right.
So are they going to have those people come in there and do that? And are they going to rely on a very small sliver of the community that may or may not have other interests in the field?
Yeah. Are you talking more like the actual engineers and the operators themselves coming in?
Correct. Yep.
Matt, what do you think about that? Since, I totally agree, Scribs. It's a lot of the same names, which isn't bad.
And anybody listening, right? The community, as me, I still consider myself an outsider to the community. I've only started working with Matt, 3 years ago or so, and everything else. I come from a different background, but I know this community is super small to begin with, right? So there's really not a lot of people to rely on to do it, but there are a lot of people on the fringe, like you were saying, that could do it and have a lot of really great ideas, but maybe not stepping all the way up to be part of that process. And maybe some of the big names in the group are not as engaging with the smaller folks to bring them along the journey as well, to incorporate this stuff in there.
And I wonder how much as well, and this goes back to talking about the C-suite, making sure that, because you have operators where their most important thing is to keep everything running. So how about most important thing, you actually take, a week off and come do this policy work for me? Well, probably not go so well.
Yeah.
Great. We still need them to do that.
Yeah.
So there are engineers. Jake Brodsky comes to mind, who is an engineer who I would really recommend to anybody who's on. He's engaged in the policy world, and he is an OT engineer. He's been doing this for a really long time. He's got great ideas, and he's the type of person that we should be saying, in addition to the rest of us who are in this, having these conversations all the time, or whose job it is to talk at the policy levels or for the C-suites or to inform the C-suites. We need to make sure we have the actual operators at the table. Yeah. Jake had a really good point when he was talking about something. I was, talking about cyber policy, and he was like, I can implement whatever you want, but the result may not be exactly what you expected or what you hoped for, but I can do it. And I think any operator, I think that's where, and Matt, you can, confirm or deny this. I think when we come in with our fantastic ideas and the operators are like, fine, but you're crazy, but okay, I'll do it because you told me to. I think that's where we hit a lot of the rub, because then we as policymakers go, oh crap, that's not what I wanted. What did you just do?
Yeah.
We can very easily create our own limiting moves, right? Where all of a sudden we put something in place, and then you start realizing how people procedurally and technically do things, and it breaks all of that. Just to take a step back, I just want so everybody know a little bit of how we got here in the first place, from how things got built and education and where things are at. I mean, a lot of what we've built operationally to support critical infrastructure, whether it's traditional or non-traditional, as we're getting in some of the edge type devices and even homes, but we made really good decisions at the time that we made them, right? We made really good decisions about how we operated things, how we automated things, and I keep every time, I run a class or have a conversation, or even myself, right? I'll be the first one. I'll raise my hand. I would not design a network, a system, a control system the way that I would 15 years ago, 20 years ago, with the knowledge that I have today. I mean, that's just it. Things have changed. Technology has changed. Chips are smaller. Things are faster. Wireless is everywhere. Attackers are more, aware of what's happening. Some of the technology is more widespread and accessible than what it has been before, which is also good things. I mean, that information is also great for innovation. But what got us here a little bit now, and some of the things we need, we start looking at. I mean, when somebody gets an engineering degree, I mean, some of our engineers that build this, when they go and get their professional engineering licensure, they're not required to do any type of cybersecurity education. And when I go and look at some of the big schools, right, and I've had the opportunity through the DOE Cyberforce competition, and in fact, I'm adjunct faculty up at a university, but when I go and look at that and I see the curriculum that's being offered, I'm like, this is missing the mark. There's so much we can do, and that professor may even want to include those additional topics, but they're already straddled into what they have to do to be able to meet these certain requirements for that test they have to go take. Yeah. And what I don't want, one of the things I think we have to solve is, if we're going to have innovation, we can't necessarily just be teaching to a test. We have to be, and it can't just be a written test. It has to be an operational test. I had a conversation with somebody a couple of years ago talking about, should we do this like the medical field, where we actually have like a natural internship or something where you actually have to come out and be working while you're at the university, and you have 6 months where you go on site, and that's required, just like we have with doctors where you have to come
residency.
Residency, yeah.
Actually, a residency. Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of bull. That's not my idea. That was somebody else's idea, and I loved it. But that idea didn't get fostered, right? Maybe it didn't get in the right ears or the right places. And so I think, and I'm not saying that we have the right ears or the right place to be able to tell people, but if somebody has an idea, maybe try to disseminate it as best you can, and reach out to us, and we can try to echo it as they go along with it. But the last thing I want to say, just before I hand it off, is every time we would do a site assessment, every single time, the operators, the engineers, the technicians, they know where the vulnerabilities are. They see it. They understand it. They also have some pretty creative answers as well, because they've already been answering problems for a long time. I've gone into so many places where I'm like, how'd you fix that? Well, I had to build it myself. I went back to my shop and I built the whole thing. I was like, oh my gosh, how many of those are there? Well, I built one spare. There's no other company else supported.
Make sure when the cap hits the fan, right?
Right. And I'm retiring next week, but nonetheless, but there's genius there. Yeah. It seems like it's been untapped, and I think it's the time to tap that genius specifically, and this is an opportunity we have to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and I just want to go back to your point because, we're talking about the government can do hard things. We were talking specifically about the sprint, and I've got thoughts on that. But there's a lot of initiatives that the administration is putting in place about education policy, all the things which I've never touched before in my life. However, to your point, is this an opportunity to say, knock, knock, perhaps somebody can introduce this idea that we need to do some cross-training? I love the idea of doing a cyber residency or an operation or an OT residency or something. But that would be amazing. And how can you use the power of the government, that the government does have utility, to start pushing some of these ideas out and creating that public-private partnership to, road test some of these new ideas?
Yeah.
So I have a crazy idea too. Like, we're doing this internal to the U.S., right? We're looking at this piece, but how do we, since the edge is really going to be a global thing, right? What are your thoughts on how do we compel our nearest neighbors, Canada and Mexico, to protect their systems, and then our other partners and stuff? Not just talking about supply chain wise, but really how do we protect the critical infrastructure of other places that could potentially have an impact here on the U.S. or ours having an impact on theirs? Almost like not a Paris climate type thing, but something for critical infrastructure.
Yeah. Matt, I'm going to patch that to you because I've got some thoughts, but I want to hear you first.
I remember it was a while back. It was some kind of a study, something I read, and it was basically just looking at around the world and trying to see which countries had offensive capabilities in cyber, right? And so that was just an analysis, and then see, are they thinking about how they're securing critical infrastructure or not? If they have offensive, then they at least know there's a risk. And so then if you go around the globe, there's still, I think, a handful that do that, but there's very few that actually even understand there's even a risk there. They don't know that this is even a problem. And so I think step one would be having that kind of awareness that there is, or maybe the group, the community that does know, start with that and then help influence other people that then also need to know. I mean, we have mining operations, right? There's mining operations throughout the whole globe. We have so many things that we're sharing, and really, I mean, if we have to, I've always felt that if we follow an isolationist model, we will lose. We have got to come together as a community because we have worldwide resources. And in fact, I've even said for a while that, if things started hitting the fan, maybe there needs to be an alien invasion, sort of like,
Independence Day.
Independence Day.
Said they're
all come
they're
together.
probably not benevolent. They're probably here to destroy us. So maybe you don't.
But of course, after everything happened, they started fighting again. It was all done. But it's the world really is so small. We have the ability to share data, at milliseconds around the globe. We're all interconnected. We're all in the good part of town or the bad part of town. That's what I've been trying to say, at least electronically. We're all in the same part of town, right? And then even operationally with our supply chain, we're all interconnected in ways. And so we have to have some kind of expanded partnership. I love the idea. The question is how to facilitate something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, Scrib, so the part that I was going to add is I know from my experience working at Homeland that there are countries, Japan, Australia, Canada, UK, Germany, parts of the EU, some of the Baltic states are doing stuff relative towards critical infrastructure. What's very interesting that I found when I was working over there is how much more regulatory control different countries have than the model we have here in the United States. So the UK, for example, can compel critical national infrastructure to do certain things. And so I know that there was an initiative for more commercial IoT that the UK government was working on. I haven't followed it for about a year. But after that, I think they were going to start tackling CNI. And to that point, though, there is more authority that because there's nationalized infrastructure in a lot of other countries other than ours, and some follow our model, but it's mostly more national control. You can implement more than we can here in the United States because we're reliant on the private sector, for better or for worse. And what I find there are obviously international standards bodies that are working together to come up with this would be our best practices. But I'm saying this in a literal, I don't know. I haven't ever studied the efficacy or not. I don't know how effective best practices are for a model like ours where it's all voluntary and there is no penalty or shame, even just from like, public square of private sector, when there's no penalty for not doing it, when there's no cost to doing nothing or cost to doing very little. So anyways, it's my thoughts.
There's been password standards for how many years and we still have poor passwords.
Right.
Not at the simplistic level there. I know it's the opposite end of the spectrum, but again, going back to how do we enforce these things? How do we compel people to do the things that need to be done right?
Yeah, and that's why I think, to Matt's point and to you guys as well, is there has to, I don't know what the answers are. I mean, I've got some like lightning bug, dull kind of ideas, but they would need to be generated and thought out with other people. Or mother people. My mom's got good ideas too. With other people to really get those right ideas out there, or people who have way better ideas than me to figure out what's our blue sky here? What's our possibility? What's the outcome we're trying to achieve? Because the outcome, now I think, so the government, I'm just going to pause here. I think the government, some of their outcome is getting private sector data back to the government, which I don't necessarily disagree with. It just needs to be a little bit, I would like to see it more transparent to the public that that's what they're trying to do. Because that's really beneficial to the IC to develop offensive capabilities. But, I think looking at like, what exactly are we trying to achieve? We want to achieve world peace? I don't really quite know what that is other than make things more secure. But let's detail that out a little bit. What exactly are we trying to get to? And then back end from there. How do we get there?
Yeah.
Good points.
So on one element on how to get there, we connected a long time ago, and you were not working at Mocana at that time. You were working within a variety of different, ICS cert and underneath, with Marty Edwards and everything. But now you are at Mocana. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so I bounced out of the government. I love the government. I mean, I have worked in the government since before you met me. It's probably since I was 25 years old. But I moved out of the government because I wanted to address the challenge that I've been talking about today, which is how do you make mission critical devices themselves more secure? Because I saw we're answering things on a very OT network way, which is still the truth today. So Mocana is a software company, and you see here on our little tagline, we're protecting mission critical devices from unauthorized control, manipulation, and weaponization. And that is about the devices and the data they produce. So what we do is we take an IoT style approach where we're assuming things are going to be mostly headless, where data needs to be known good, where the device itself, you have to have zero trust at the device, not just from the users of the device, where we are assuming that mission critical things are going to be attempted to be manipulated, controlled, or weaponized, or the data they produce by bad actors. So we're not talking necessarily just about the script kiddie. We're talking about the nations who are looking to kill people and cause mayhem and havoc in either internationally just for things that they want to sow distrust and dissent, or here where they may want to actually impact our ability to live our lives, free and fair and open. So what we do is we build solutions to create systems of trusted devices and systems that support the life cycles of those devices. And for me, it's not just I want to sell some stuff. Of course we all do. We all want to make a living. But for me, it's really about making sure that we save the lives of everybody we're trying to protect in the nation. And for me, that way to do that is by protecting mission critical devices. So across critical infrastructure, weapon systems, all of that, to really say, how do we take the principles of good practices for IoT and apply that to where, and this is why I said security for the digital revolution, because we're talking about things have completely changed. Not just they are changing or they will change, they have changed. So how do we now answer that challenge? And Mocana has a solution to do that.
That is awesome. I mean, Kim, when you go back, we have to secure the devices, right? No matter what they are. And so if let's say if I was a vendor and I had my own product, how would I get started? Could I reach out to you and then we do some development work? How does that?
Absolutely. So we have technology. So it's all based on where Mocana started, which was way before I was involved in the company. So 2002 we started with crypto libraries. So it's all based in in crypto. So we have a system now. So we're not just crypto libraries. If you look on some of our old materials, you'll see some of that, but we're really talking about a system. So either if you're an OEM and you're looking for assistance on not just how to build security in, but also to how to maintain the control of the life cycle. So we're talking about supply chain security from software development, and this can be any piece of software, firmware, mission data, nav data, all of that sort of stuff. So from initiation all the way to point of presence on a system, we can help with that. We can do all sorts of really interesting things on device level control. So you can give us a call. We can talk to you. We sell via binaries as well as the operations platform. Or if you're government, we're doing more proof of concept with the government because it's proprietary and sometimes classified weapon systems. So we're doing some really interesting things to show you how our technology works on the government side. So how we can help secure weapon systems.
So what I'm hearing, right, if I want to internalize that, if I'm a vendor or an OEM, or I have some products and software, I've been developing it over time. I've been using whatever the traditional means have been, for decades or 10 years, however long that I've been in operation. And, I may not have an understanding of what trusts I've even taken on in that software lifecycle, that organic, I got some libraries here, I installed some hardware here,
I digitally sign, maybe I got a crypto hash.
Yeah.
Thing.
And so now you're taking some of that, you're helping with that, you're providing that capability to be able to have that stronger foundation.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm hearing.
Right. Yeah. We make the device secure. So we have a lot of cool things that we can do on the device based on your use case. I mean, when I say a lot, I mean a lot. A lot of really neat things. And we do it via binaries. So it's no longer selling source code. We sell binaries to you based on your platform. And then also, okay, now you have a secure device. Cool. How do you keep that thing secure and trustworthy? Right. So that's where the operations platform comes in. It's called Trust Center. The other stuff's called Trust Edge. So edge devices, and then center being the operations part. Where how do you say, okay, I'm a OEM and I'm going to be distributing this secure thing out to X number of owner operators. And I can also sell to them my operations platform so they can take ownership and control. It can merge with whatever lifecycle management products they may already have in place. But this is so you can distribute all of your software updates securely, known secure. The device can call back and say, here's my baseline based on crypto. And if you use a secure element, a TPM, a puff, or whatever, moving through all of that and really using the power of IoT principles to apply to critical devices across a gamut of things. So everybody asks, well, Emily, what are you talking about? I mean, we can go, depending on the size of the device, some level 0, level 1, all the way to server class machines.
That's awesome. And again, for everybody being aware, we're talking about the Purdue reference model there for level 0, level 1. So we're at the edge being the sensors and the actuators as well as the controllers down at that level.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a lick and stick sensor, no. But it's got a certain level of, we can
computational capability. Yeah.
Right, certain sort of computational capability.
I've never heard of something called a lick and stick sensor, but that's pretty funny.
I'm cribbing. Somebody else told me that because they were like, well, what about this? I'm like, no, it doesn't have a brain. It's just like an analog type lick and stick sensor. No. But it's really interesting technology. And, it's all based on standards. So there's nothing like it's new and interesting the way we've knit things together, but it's not some proprietary thing that you're never going to be able to use with anything else. The whole idea is that it can be used, it can be updated, standards based. And this is all something that, it's using PKI principles, making, certificate management, revocation, all of that so much easier for scale, because that's it's one of our use cases. That is such a pain in the butt to do. Like when you're trying to do certificate revocation, when you're talking about potentially an environment where you have thousands, hundreds of thousands devices that you may need to do that for. Well, now we've made it a lot easier. So. Yeah,
very rarely do you have PKI and easy in the same breath. But,
right.
Right.
And there's a lot of really interesting background. I'm so passionate about it. I believe in our technology. It's newer to the market, but for anybody who knows the IEC 62443 or ISA 99 3-3 standards, if you know the security levels, we today, now granted there's an AI portion at the top of it that we don't do, but we can integrate with it. We today can get you to security level 4 out of the box.
That's awesome.
That's a huge deal.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was something that you said that I commonly don't hear, but when I think about securing systems, I think about you have to secure them at the build phase.
Yep.
You have to secure them at the operational phase, and you have to secure them at the maintenance phase.
Yep.
And then, of course, the last one's decommissioning, right, at some point in the future. And so you have to think through those types of costs as you're going to do it, or at least make a conscious decision of which costs you want to be going through and realizing. And so when I start thinking about any type of influencements, enhancements, things that we need to do to try to secure the market, I think we need to try to look at those categories, and trying to make sure that we have those abilities.
Yeah, and I like to say to people who I'm talking to, when they say, well, okay, so it sounds like I need to do this in the build phase. What I like to say is there is no wrong time to implement Mocana technology, because it's not, yes, it is for new build, but it's also for stuff that's already been fielded, because we are delivering binaries. So you tell us the OS, the platform,
right.
the VM, we make sure the binary works, boom, Bob's your uncle, there you go, and you have your operations platform to continue to use it and use the power of technology. So if you're developing something net new, you have something in research, sweet, let's figure out how we can help you. If you have something that you say, Emily, this would be really great to use, but it's already fielded and deployed, and I'd like to increase blah, blah, blah capabilities and actually have some visibility onto these devices for operational control, for certificate management, et cetera. We're not limited by certificate authority. All we have to do is build out a connector for anything that we're not ported to. So for like DoD, we're not ported to DoD connectors yet, but we can do that. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. So the whole point is make it flexible for a lot of things that are various sizes, various needs, various use cases, and trying to solve the challenges of how the hell do we do this and do it to scale and do it in a way that we don't have to wait another 6 years. We have the technology today.
That's right. Yeah. Just like you quoted Jake earlier, right?
Yeah.
We have the technology. We just need to have the willpower, the guidance, or the request to come in to go and do it.
Exactly.
Well, do you have any closing words? Anything you'd like to summarize up?
I think in closing, going back to, I said there's no wrong time for Mocana. There's no wrong time for you. I want everybody who has cyber adjacent, cyber in, hacker, policy wonk, somebody who's just getting into the field, guys, this is your time. This is your moment, because we need you. If it's just all of us repeating the echo chamber of like ideas, or maybe we've got like a bulb of a good idea, but there's nobody else to really, bounce those off of and create new concepts and new thoughts, we're just going to keep doing the same thing we've always done. And we need you to help us think about new ways of contributing to solving these challenges. These are big problems. So my advice is jump in. We're ready. We're ready for you.
That's awesome. I love that in closing. So thank you, Emily, for being a part of our talk, our conversation. Looking forward to working with you more in the community. So,
oh, yeah. And I didn't put any of my contact information out there. I'm on LinkedIn, Emily S. Miller. There's a bajillion Emily Millers. It's Emily S. Miller. And then my Twitter handle is @IndeedEmily. So you guys can reach out to me there.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, this has been Twitch Talk with Emily Miller and Scribs. We've been talking about aligning forces to cybersecure the world, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. And we'll be back in 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks we'll be getting ready to kick off the RSA conference. We'll be demonstrating some of our mission stations that we're going to be having in the ICS sandbox at RSA. Bye.
Bye, guys.